Hey guys, tonight we travel far east, to a land where the gods created islands with spears, where the sun goddess once vanished and plunged the world into darkness, and where dragons, demons, and divine swords shaped the destiny of emperors. But before we begin, if myth stories like this bring you peace or wonder, feel free to support the channel with a free subscription. And tell me, where are you watching from right now? I read every comment. It's always fascinating to see people tuning in from all over the world. Now take a deep breath and relax. This is Myth Night, where you unwind, and I tell you myth stories. And if you fall asleep before it ends, that's okay. Some myths were meant to be finished in dreams, in the gentle darkness, where dreams meet memory, where the veil between worlds grows thin as morning mist. There exists a land where gods walk among cherry blossoms and dragons slumber beneath sacred mountains. This is Japan, where every stone holds a spirit, every stream carries ancient songs, and every shadow whispers stories older than written time. Picture, if you will, a world where the boundaries between the divine and mortal realm are as fluid as ink spreading through water, where a simple fox might transform into a beautiful woman, where thunder gods battle sea serpents in the clouds above Mount Fuji, and where the rising sun herself once hid in a cave, plunging the world into eternal night. Japanese mythology flows like a river with countless tributaries, each tale connecting to others in an endless web of divine relationships, cosmic battles, and profound truths about the nature of existence itself. Unlike the structured pantheons of Greece or Rome, the Japanese spiritual universe is vast and interconnected, populated by millions of kami, spirits that inhabit everything from towering mountains to humble kitchen utensils. This is not merely a collection of old stories, but a living tapestry that continues to shape the soul of Japan even today. In the neon-lit streets of Tokyo, businessmen still bow at small roadside shrines. In the ancient forests of sacred mountains, pilgrims climb paths worn smooth by millions of feet, seeking connection with powers that predate human civilization. The birth of all things. Before there was earth or sky, before there was light or shadow, there existed only the primordial chaos called Konton, a swirling void of infinite possibility where nothing had yet taken form. From this cosmic emptiness, like the first breath of creation itself, emerged the first kami, beings of pure divine essence who would shape reality from the raw materials of nothingness. But it was two particular deities who would become the architects of the world we know. Their names were Izanagi no Mikoto and Izanami no Mikoto, he who invites and she who invites, and their love story would literally create the islands of Japan while simultaneously introducing death itself into the world. Standing together on the floating bridge of heaven, a rainbow pathway suspended in the infinite void, Izanagi grasped a jeweled spear that sparkled with starlight. The cosmic silence was broken only by their breathing as they peered down into the churning waters below, primordial seas that had never known the touch of land. "Let us create something beautiful," Izanami whispered, her voice carrying the music of creation itself. Izanagi lowered the divine spear into the waters, and as he stirred, the ocean began to foam and bubble around the sacred weapon. When he lifted it again, drops of brine fell from its tip, and where they touched the void, they hardened into the first island, Onogoro, the self-coagulating island that would become the foundation of their divine work. Descending to this newborn land, the two kami built a heavenly pillar at its center, a cosmic axis that connected earth to sky. Around this pillar, they performed the first marriage ceremony in existence, walking in opposite directions until they met again on the far side. When they embraced, their divine union sparked the birth of the Japanese archipelago, island after island, springing from their love like children born of starlight and sea foam. Awaji Island emerged first, followed by Shikoku, Oki, Kyushu, Aiki, Tsushima, Sado, and finally the great island of Honshu. 8 islands that would become the sacred heart of Japan. But their creative passion didn't stop there. Together, they brought forth mountains and rivers, forests and plains, and countless kami to govern every aspect of the natural world. Yet even in this paradise of creation, darkness lurked. When Izanami gave birth to Kagutsuchi, the fire god, his blazing form burned her so terribly that she died from her wounds. In his grief and rage, Izanagi drew his sword and slew his own newborn son, but it was too late. His beloved wife had already begun her journey to Yomi, the shadowy underworld of the dead. Unable to accept this loss, Izanagi made a decision that would change the fundamental nature of existence. He would follow her into the realm of death itself and bring her back to the world of the living. The entrance to Yomi gaped before him like the mouth of some cosmic beast, exhaling the cold breath of the grave. As he descended into that twilight realm, his footsteps echoed in corridors that had never known sunlight. The air grew thick and heavy, tasting of dust and forgotten dreams. When he finally found Izanami in the depths of the underworld, she spoke to him from the shadows, her voice now carrying the weight of eternity. "My beloved, you have come too late. I have already eaten the food of the dead. I am no longer of your world." But Izanagi's love burned too fiercely to accept defeat. "Please," he begged, "return with me. The world above is not complete without you." Izanami considered his words, and for a moment, hope flickered like a candle flame in the darkness. "Perhaps there is a way," she said slowly. "I will speak with the lords of Yomi, but you must promise me one thing. You must not look upon me while I negotiate for my release. No matter what you hear, no matter how long I am gone, you must not light a flame or seek to see me until I return." Izanagi agreed, and Izanami disappeared deeper into the underworld. But as the hours stretched into eternity, as strange sounds echoed from the depths, and his wife did not return, curiosity and fear began to gnaw at his heart like hungry ghosts. Finally, unable to bear the waiting any longer, he broke off one of the teeth from the comb in his hair and set it aflame as a torch. By its flickering light, he went searching for his beloved, and what he found would haunt him for all eternity. Izanami's once beautiful form had become a thing of horror, her body crawling with maggots and decay, her flesh rotting from her bones. The sight was so terrible that Izanagi cried out in revulsion and fear, and at the sound of his voice, his wife's eyes opened, blazing with the fury of betrayal. "You have shamed me," she shrieked, her voice like the wailing of winter wind. "You have seen my disgrace. For this I will drag 1,000 of the living to join me in death every day." As demons and spirits of the underworld gave chase, Izanagi fled back toward the world of the living, his heart breaking with each step. Behind him, Izanami's voice echoed with a terrible promise: 1,000 shall die each day. But as he neared the entrance to the world above, Izanagi turned and called back to the wife he had lost forever. "If you take 1,000, then I will give life to 1,500 more each day." And so death entered the world, balanced by the promise of new life, the eternal cycle that governs all existence to this day. The birth of light and storm. Broken and defiled by his journey through the underworld, Izanagi emerged into the world of the living like a soul reborn. Every part of him was contaminated by death's touch, and he knew that purification was not just necessary but sacred, a ritual that would birth the most important deities in all Japanese mythology. He made his way to the mouth of the Tachibana River in Kyushu, where clear waters ran swift and clean over smooth stones. There, beneath the open sky, he began the ritual of misogi, the purification that would wash away the stains of death and create new divine life from the act of cleansing itself. As he removed his clothing, each garment transformed into a deity. His staff became a god, his belt another, his sandals yet more divine beings, 12 in all, born from the simple act of undressing. But it was when he waded into the sacred waters and began to wash that the true miracles occurred. The water that flowed from his left eye as he cleansed his face began to glow with inner light, coalescing into the form of the most beautiful goddess ever born, Amaterasu Omikami, the sun goddess, whose radiance would light the world for all eternity. Her beauty was so brilliant that the very waters around her shimmered like liquid gold. From his right eye came another divine being, pale and serene as moonlight on still water, Tsukuyomi no Mikoto, the moon god, who would rule over the night and the gentle mysteries of darkness. His light was soft and silver, complementing his sister's golden fire, but it was from his nose that the most tempestuous of his children emerged, Susanoo no Mikoto, the storm god, whose very birth stirred the waters into whitecaps and set the wind howling through the reeds. His hair was wild as storm clouds, his eyes flashed like lightning, and his voice rumbled like distant thunder. As Izanagi looked upon his 3 greatest children, his heart swelled with wonder and hope. Despite the tragedy that had brought them into being, they were perfect, embodiments of the fundamental forces that would govern the world he and Izanami had created. To you, Amaterasu, he declared, I give dominion over the high heavenly plane and all the daylight hours. Be the light that guides humanity through their daily struggles. To you, Tsukuyomi, he continued, I grant the realm of night. Rule wisely over darkness and dreams, over rest and reflection. And to you, Susanoo, he concluded, though his voice carried a note of uncertainty, I give command over the seas and storms. May your power serve creation rather than destroy it. From the beginning, it was clear that these 3 siblings embodied very different aspects of divine nature. Amaterasu was gracious and responsible, taking her duties seriously and governing with wisdom and compassion. She created rice fields in heaven, established the sacred weaving hall where divine garments were made, and brought order to the celestial realm. Tsukuyomi was mysterious and distant, preferring solitude to company, contemplation to action. He kept to himself, emerging only when night fell, his pale light a gentle comfort to lovers and dreamers, to those who needed the soft darkness to rest their weary souls. But Susanoo was chaos incarnate. From the moment of his birth, he wept and raged, causing mountains to crumble and seas to boil with his tantrums. His tears were floods that devastated the land. His anger was hurricanes that uprooted ancient forests. When he laughed, thunder rolled across the heavens, and when he frowned, lightning split the sky. Why do you weep so? Izanagi asked his youngest son, his voice heavy with concern and growing frustration. Susanu's voice was the sound of waves crashing against cliffs. I want to go to my mother, he declared. I want to join Izanami in the land of the dead, rather than rule over this realm of the living. This defiance enraged Izanagi, who banished Susanoo from his presence. Go then, he commanded, but first bid farewell to your sister, Amaterasu, in the high heavenly plane. Perhaps she can teach you wisdom before you choose the path of destruction. But Susanoo's journey to bid farewell to his sister would not be the peaceful parting Izanagi had envisioned. The storm god's approach to the heavenly realm was so violent that mountains shook and rivers changed their courses. The very foundations of heaven trembled under his footsteps. Amaterasu, feeling the realm shake around her, feared that her brother was coming not to say goodbye, but to conquer her domain. She armed herself like a warrior, binding up her long hair in the style of a man, stringing bows and arrows, and donning armor that blazed like the sun itself. When Susanoo finally appeared before her, his wild hair streaming with storm winds, she challenged him directly. Why have you come to my realm with such violence? Do you seek to steal my throne? Sister, Susanoo replied, his voice gentling for perhaps the first time since his birth. I come only to bid you farewell before I descend to the underworld to join our mother. I mean you no harm. But Amaterasu was not easily convinced. If your intentions are pure, then prove it to me. Let us compete in creating children. If your heart is innocent, then you will create daughters, gentle and pure. But if you harbor violent ambitions, your children will be sons, warriors who could challenge my rule. This challenge set the stage for one of the most important contests in Japanese mythology, a divine competition that would have consequences reaching far beyond the heavenly realm, ultimately shaping the imperial line of Japan itself and defining the relationship between order and chaos for all time. The contest of creation. The high heavenly plane grew silent as the two most powerful deities in existence faced each other across the sacred river that flowed through the heart of the celestial realm. The very air seemed to hold its breath as Amaterasu and Susanoo prepared for their contest of divine creation. Very well, Amaterasu declared, her voice carrying the authority of one who had never backed down from a challenge. We shall each create children from objects belonging to the other. The gender of our offspring will reveal the purity of our intentions. Susanoo unfastened his sword, a magnificent blade that crackled with the power of storms, and handed it to his sister. In return, Amaterasu gave him the curved jewels from her hair ornaments, stones that held captured starlight within their depths. Taking the sword, Amaterasu performed the ritual with divine grace. She broke the blade into 3 pieces, chewed them thoroughly, then breathed out a mist that sparkled with fragments of metal and saliva. From this divine breath emerged 3 beautiful goddesses, each one more radiant than moonlight on water. Susanoo took the jewels and performed the same ritual, but his approach was characteristically violent. He crunched the gems between his teeth like a man eating ice, swallowed them whole, then expelled them as 5 male deities, each one born with the bearing of a warrior and the eyes of a conqueror. When the ritual was complete, Susanoo threw back his head and laughed with triumph, a sound like thunder rolling across mountain peaks. Look, sister, you have borne only daughters from my sword, while I have created 5 sons from your jewels. This proves that my heart is pure and yours harbors violent thoughts. But Amaterasu's wisdom saw through his flawed logic instantly. Foolish brother, she replied, her voice carrying the patient tone of a teacher correcting a slow student. Those goddesses were born from your sword. They are your children, gentle because your heart, despite your wild nature, truly meant no harm. The 5 male gods came from my jewels. They are my sons, born of my divine essence. Your interpretation is backwards. This reasoning enraged Susanoo, who had never learned to accept being wrong. In his fury at being outwitted by his sister, he began a rampage through the high heavenly plane that would go down as one of the most destructive temper tantrums in mythological history. First, he destroyed the rice fields that Amaterasu had carefully cultivated, trampling the sacred plants beneath his feet and filling in the irrigation channels with mud and stones. Then he defecated in the hall where the harvest festival was to be celebrated, contaminating the sacred space with his filth. But his final act was the most terrible of all. In the sacred weaving hall where Amaterasu and her attendants created the garments of the gods, he tore a hole in the roof and hurled down a heavenly piebald horse, a divine stallion that he had killed and skinned backwards in a grotesque reversal of the natural order. The sight of this desecrated creature falling from the sky was so shocking that one of Amaterasu's attendants died from fright, pierced by her own weaving shuttle as she started in terror. The others fled screaming, and the sacred weaving hall was left in ruins, soaked with blood and defiled beyond repair. This final atrocity was more than even the patient sun goddess could bear. Her radiant face darkened with grief and rage as she looked upon the destruction of her sacred space and the death of her innocent attendant. Without a word, she turned away from the heavenly realm and walked to a cave called Amano Iwato, the heavenly rock dwelling. As she entered the cave, she spoke a command that would doom the world. Let there be darkness. Then she sealed herself inside with a boulder that no mortal strength could move. The moment Amaterasu disappeared into the cave, darkness fell over both heaven and earth, like a curtain dropped across the stage of existence. Without the sun goddess to bring the dawn, day never came. Plants began to wither and die. Evil spirits emerged from their hiding places to terrorize the world, and chaos reigned supreme. In the depths of their despair, the 8 million kami gathered outside the cave, pleading with Amaterasu to return. But their entreaties so fell on deaf ears. The sun goddess remained sealed in her self-imposed exile, leaving the world to face the consequences of Susanoo's violence. We must find a way to lure her out, declared Omoikane, the deity of wisdom and intelligence. But how do we make someone who has everything desire to leave her sanctuary? The answer would come from the most unlikely source, the power of laughter and the irresistible pull of curiosity, tools that would prove more effective than all the pleading and commanding in the universe. The dance that saved the world. In the perpetual darkness that had consumed all creation, the 8 million kami gathered in council outside the sealed cave where Amaterasu had hidden herself. The situation was desperate. Without the sun goddess, the world was slowly dying. Crops withered in the fields, evil spirits roamed freely, and despair settled over gods and mortals alike, like a suffocating blanket. But among the assembled deities stood one whose spirit could not be dimmed even by this cosmic catastrophe, Ame no Uzume, the goddess of dawn and revelry, whose laughter was like silver bells, and whose joy was as irrepressible as spring water bubbling from the earth. My fellow kami, she announced, her voice cutting through the gloom like a blade of light. We have tried reasoning with our beloved sun sister. We have tried pleading and commanding. But perhaps What she needs is not our arguments, but our celebration of life itself. The other deities looked at her skeptically. How could celebration exist in this world of eternal night? But Amino Uzume's eyes sparkled with mischief and determination. "Bring me a wash basin," she commanded. "Turn it upside down to make a stage. Gather sacred sakaki branches and string them with jewels and mirrors. And bring sake, enough for all 8 million of us to drink until we forget our sorrows." As the deities followed her instructions, Ame no Uzumi began to prepare herself for what would become the most important performance in the history of the world. She bound up her sleeves with club moss, crowned her head with bamboo grass, and in her hands she grasped bundled bamboo leaves that rustled like rain on summer leaves. The mirror. The mirror was the most crucial element. Yata no Kagami, the sacred mirror that would later become one of the 3 imperial treasures of Japan, was positioned carefully to reflect any light that might emerge from the cave. Then, as the 8 million kami formed a circle around the overturned wash basin, Amino Uzume began to dance. It started slowly, gracefully, her movements flowing like water over stones. But as the rhythm built within her, the dance became wilder, more abandoned. She leapt and spun, her feet drumming against the makeshift stage, her laughter ringing out like music in the darkness. And then, as the spirit of pure joy possessed her completely, she began to remove her clothing piece by piece, transforming her divine dance into something primal and celebratory, the very essence of life asserting itself against the darkness. The other kami, caught up in her infectious energy, began to laugh and cheer and clap their hands. The sound of their mirth echoed across heaven and earth, a sound of such pure joy that it had not been heard since the world was young. Inside her cave, Amaterasu heard this impossible sound, the sound of happiness in the midst of the darkness she had created. Her divine mind raced with confusion and curiosity. How could there be celebration when she had withdrawn her light from the world? How could there be joy when the sun no longer rose? Unable to resist, she moved a tiny bit of the boulder aside and peeked out into the darkness. "Why do you celebrate?" she called out, her voice echoing from the cave's mouth. "The world is covered in darkness because I have hidden myself away. What could possibly cause such joy in these circumstances?" Ameno Uzume, still dancing wildly on her makeshift stage, called back without missing a step. "O great Amaterasu, we celebrate because we have found a goddess even more wonderful than you. Her light outshines even yours." This impossible claim struck Amaterasu like lightning. More wonderful than her? A greater light than the sun? Such a thing could not exist. Driven by curiosity and perhaps a touch of divine pride, she pushed the boulder aside a little further and peered out to see the supposed superior deity. At that exact moment, the cleverly positioned mirror caught her radiant face and reflected it back to her. The sight of her own brilliant light blazing back at her was so startling that she leaned forward to get a better look, and in that instant of vulnerability, Tajikarao, the god of strength, seized her hand and pulled her completely out of the cave. The moment Amaterasu emerged, light blazed across heaven and earth like the dawn of the first day. The withered plants straightened and bloomed. The evil spirits fled shrieking back to their hiding places, and the world breathed again in relief and gratitude. But even as light returned to creation, the consequences of this cosmic drama were not finished. Susanu's violence had consequences that could not be simply forgiven and forgotten, even by his compassionate sister. the kami held council and pronounced judgment upon the storm god. His divine beard and the nails of his fingers and toes were cut off as symbols of his disgrace. He was fined 1,000 offering tables worth of restitution goods. And finally, he was banished from the high heavenly plane forever, condemned to wander the earthly realm until he could prove himself worthy of redemption. As Susanoo began his descent to the world below, his heart was heavy with shame and regret. The wild god who had caused such destruction would need to find some way to atone for his crimes, and that opportunity would come sooner than he expected, in the form of the most terrifying monster Japan had ever known. The serpent of 8 heads and 8 tails. Cast out from the heavenly realm in disgrace, Susanoo descended to earth like a fallen star, his divine essence crackling through the atmosphere as he plummeted toward the land of mortals. He landed in the province of Izumo, where ancient mountains rose like the spines of sleeping dragons, and rivers ran clear and cold from sacred peaks. As he wandered this unfamiliar realm, his heart heavy with shame and loneliness, he came upon a sight that would change the course of his eternal existence. There, beside a rushing river, sat an old man and woman, their faces streaked with tears, their shoulders shaking with grief. Between them huddled a young girl of extraordinary beauty, her long black hair flowing like midnight silk, her eyes bright with unshed tears. The god of storms, who had never shown kindness to anyone, found himself moved by this scene of mortal sorrow. "Why do you weep?" he asked, his voice gentler than it had ever been before. The old man looked up, his eyes widening as he recognized the divine nature of the stranger before him. "My lord," he said, bowing deeply, "I am Ashinazuchi, and this is my wife Tenazuchi. We are the parents of this maiden, Kushinada Hime. We weep because tomorrow our daughter must die." "Die?" Susanoo's eyes flashed with the old familiar anger, but this time it was not directed at the mortals before him. Who dares to threaten her? What enemy approaches that makes such brave parents despair? The old woman raised her tear-stained face. "My lord, we have had 8 daughters, each more beautiful than cherry blossoms in spring. But every year, on this same day, the terrible Yamata no Orochi comes down from the mountains. This monster, this abomination, has 8 heads and 8 tails, eyes like winter berries, moss growing on its back, and a belly that bleeds constantly from its own corruption." Ashinazuchi's voice shook with helpless rage. 7 of our daughters have already been devoured by this beast. Each year we hoped that perhaps it would not return, that somehow the nightmare would end. But always it comes, demanding another sacrifice, and we are powerless to refuse. As the old man spoke, Susanoo found himself studying the maiden Kushinada Hime. Her beauty was unlike anything he had ever seen, not the blazing radiance of his sister Amaterasu, nor the cold perfection of divine beings, but something warm and mortal and infinitely precious. Looking at her, he felt something stir in his heart that he had never experienced before, the desire to protect rather than destroy. "This Yamata no Orochi," he said slowly, his mind already forming plans. "Describe it to me in detail. How large is it? When will it arrive? What are its habits?" The parents exchanged glances of faint hope. Could this divine stranger actually be considering facing the monster that had terrorized their land for so many years? "The beast is enormous, my lord," Ashinazuchi explained. "Its body stretches across 8 valleys and 8 hills. Each of its 8 heads has glowing red eyes, and its tails are long enough to strangle mountains. When it moves, the earth shakes, and when it roars, avalanches fall from the peaks. And it drinks, my lord, added Tenazuchi. The creature has a terrible thirst for suck. Each time it comes, we are forced to prepare 8 vats of the strongest rice wine we can brew, for it will not touch our daughter until it has drunk itself into a stupor. At this information, Susanu's eyes gleamed with the first hint of his old cunning, but now directed toward a noble purpose rather than mere mischief. If you will give me your daughter's hand in marriage, he said formally, I swear by my divine name that she will see tomorrow's sunrise. The Yamata no Orochi has devoured its last victim. The parents' joy was overwhelming, and they agreed instantly, for what hope did they have except in this powerful stranger? But there was a condition. Suzanu asked that Kushinada Hime be transformed into a comb that he could wear in his hair during the battle, both to keep her safe and to keep her close to his heart. As the transformation was completed, and the maiden became a beautiful comb nestled in his storm-dark hair, Susanoo began his preparations. But these preparations were unlike anything he had done before. Instead of relying on brute force and divine fury, he would use intelligence, patience, and strategy. Prepare 8 platforms, he commanded the old couple, and upon each platform place a vat of your strongest sake, but not just any sake. Make it the finest you have ever brewed. Distill it 8 times until it is so potent that even a god might feel its effects. This beast will face a trap worthy of its legendary appetite. As night fell and the appointed time approached, the very air seemed to thicken with anticipation and dread. The mountains themselves appeared to hold their breath as the sound of the monster's approach began, a rumbling that started as a whisper in the earth and grew to a roar that shook leaves from trees and sent animals fleeing in terror. Then, outlined against the star-filled sky, the Yamata no Orochi appeared. The reality of the beast exceeded even the parents' terrified descriptions. Its 8 heads swayed hypnotically as it moved, each one the size of a house, eyes glowing like malevolent stars in the darkness. Its scales were black as midnight, scarred and pitted from centuries of violence, and moss and small trees grew along its massive back as if the creature were a living mountain. The stench that preceded it was overwhelming. The reek of ancient blood, rotting flesh, and the deep earth smell of things that should never see sunlight. As it approached the sacrificial site, all 8 heads turned toward the prepared sake vats, and the sound it made was like a landslide mixed with the purring of some enormous, evil cat. Without hesitation, the monster began to drink. Each head plunged deep into a vat, and the sounds of its consumption echoed across the valley, slurping, gulping, the splash of vast quantities of liquid being consumed by something with an appetite as large as its body. Hidden nearby, Suzanu waited with the patience he had never possessed before. The comb in his hair seemed to pulse with Kushinada Hime's heartbeat, reminding him that this battle was not about his own glory, but about protecting something precious and innocent. As the sake took effect, the monster's movements became sluggish, its 8 heads swaying drunkenly, its eyes becoming unfocused and dim. The terrible alertness that had made it such a perfect predator was drowning in waves of alcoholic stupor. When the last of the sake was consumed and all 8 heads had collapsed beside their empty vats, breathing heavily in drunken sleep, Suzanu emerged from hiding. In his hand blazed the Amno Habakiri, his divine sword that could cut through anything in existence. The battle, when it came, was swift and terrible. Moving like lightning itself, Susanoo struck at each of the 8 necks, his blade singing through the air with the sound of rushing wind. Black blood sprayed like fountains, staining the earth and running in rivers toward the sea. But when he reached the creature's tails, his sword struck something unexpected, a resistance that sent vibrations up his arm and nearly knocked the weapon from his grasp. Curious, he cut more carefully, and from within the severed tail emerged a blade that blazed with its own inner light. This was Kusanagi no Tsurugi, the grass-cutting sword, one of the 3 sacred treasures of Japan. The sword had been waiting within the monster's body for centuries, perhaps swallowed long ago during one of the creature's rampages, preserved and purified by its time in the beast's flesh until it became something even greater than before. As dawn broke over the mountains and the Yamata no Orochi lay dead in pieces across the landscape, Susanoo transformed the comb back into Kushinadaheim. She stood before him in the morning light, more beautiful than ever, her eyes shining with gratitude and something deeper, love for the god who had saved not just her life, but her entire land. Their wedding was celebrated throughout Izumo, and from their union would come a line of descendants who would shape Japan's destiny. The wild god of storms had found redemption through love and self-sacrifice, transforming from destroyer to protector, from chaos to guardian of order. And the sacred sword Kusanagi would eventually find its way to the heavenly realm, where it would become part of the imperial regalia, proof that even from the greatest monsters can come treasures beyond imagining, and that love truly can transform the most chaotic heart into something noble and pure. The Divine Descent. High in the Takamagahara, the high heavenly plane, Amaterasu sat upon her throne of pure light, gazing down at the earthly realm she had helped to create. But what she saw troubled her divine heart. The land below, though beautiful and fertile, was ruled by chaotic earthly kami and violent spirits who brought discord rather than harmony to the mortal world. The time had come, she decided, to establish divine order upon the earth. But who among the heavenly kami would be worthy of such a momentous task? Her choice fell upon her grandson, Ninigi no Mikoto, a young god whose name meant abundant rice ears, symbolizing prosperity and the sacred bond between heaven and the harvest that sustained life. Ninigi stood before his grandmother's radiant throne, his young face serious as he listened to the magnitude of the responsibility being placed upon his shoulders. Around them, the heavenly court had gathered, millions of kami whose light created aurora across the celestial realm. My beloved grandson, Amaterasu spoke, her voice carrying the warmth of summer sunshine and the authority of absolute divine power. The time has come for heaven to bring order to the earthly realm. You shall descend and rule over the land, establishing divine government and bringing civilization to mortals. But this would not be an ordinary divine mission. From her own radiance, Amaterasu drew forth 3 sacred treasures that would become the symbols of legitimate rule in Japan for thousands of years to come. First, she presented the Yata no Kagami, the sacred mirror that had lured her from the cave during her exile. Its surface held the power to reflect truth and banish deception. When you look into this mirror, she told him, you shall see not just your own face, but mine as well. Let it remind you that the sun's light must always guide your rule. Second came the Yasakani no Magatama, the curved jewels that had been used in the divine contest between her and Susanoo. These comma-shaped gems held the power of communication between the divine and mortal realms. These jewels will allow you to hear the voices of both kami and humans. she explained, ensuring that your rule serves both heaven and earth. Finally, she bestowed upon him the Kusanagi no Tsurugi, the grass-cutting sword that Susanoo had discovered within the body of the Yamata no Orochi. The blade hummed with power, its edge sharp enough to cut through falsehood, and its strength sufficient to defend against any enemy. This sword represents divine authority and the power to protect the innocent, Amaterasu declared. May you wield it with wisdom and justice. As Ninigi prepared for his descent, his grandmother spoke the words that would echo through Japanese history for millennia. The land below shall be, ruled by you and your descendants for all eternity. The imperial throne shall be as enduring as heaven and earth themselves. The journey from heaven to earth was not merely a matter of descending through the sky. Ninigi had to pass through layers of reality, each one more dense and physical than the last. As he descended, wrapped in clouds that concealed his divine radiance from mortal eyes, the three sacred treasures pulsed with power beside him. He was not alone in his mission. With him came a retinue of divine beings, each chosen for their special abilities to help establish heavenly rule on earth. There was Eimei no Koyani, the deity of rituals and divine ceremonies, who would teach mortals how to properly worship the kami. Futodama brought the knowledge of offerings and sacred objects. Ame no Uzume, the goddess whose dance had saved the world from eternal darkness, would establish the performing arts that would keep the divine connection alive in human culture. Most importantly, there was Omoidane, the deity of wisdom and intelligence, whose vast knowledge would be essential in creating systems of government, law, and learning that would benefit both mortals and immortals. As the divine procession descended through the clouds, they chose their landing place carefully. It would be the peak of Mount Takachiho in Kyushu, a mountain so tall that its peak touched the realm of clouds, making it a natural bridge between heaven and earth. The moment Ninigi's feet touched earthly soil, the very land responded to his divine presence. Flowers bloomed out of season, springs of pure water burst from rocky ground, and the air itself became sweeter and more life-giving. The sacred treasures began to resonate with the spiritual energy of the islands, creating an invisible network of divine power that would protect and bless the land. But establishing divine rule would not be without its challenges. The earthly realm was already inhabited by powerful kami who had ruled there since the creation of the islands. Some welcomed the arrival of heavenly authority, but others saw Ninigi's descent as an invasion of their domain. The most significant of these earthly rulers was Okunanushi, the great landmaster who had built a prosperous kingdom through his own divine power and wisdom. When messengers from heaven demanded that he surrender his rule to Ninigi, Okunanushi faced a choice that would determine the future relationship between heaven and earth. After much consideration and consultation with his divine advisors, Okunanushi made a decision that demonstrated both wisdom and grace. He would yield political authority to the heavenly line, but in return, he asked to be honored as the supreme deity of spiritual matters, relationships, and the unseen world that paralleled the visible realm. This division of authority created the foundation of Japanese spiritual government. The emperor would rule the visible world with the mandate of heaven, while Okunanushi and the earthly kami would govern the spiritual realm, ensuring that the needs of both humans and spirits were properly balanced. To seal this agreement, Okunanushi requested that a great shrine be built for him at Izumo, where he could receive proper worship and continue to bless the land with his presence. This shrine would become one of the most sacred places in Japan, second in importance only to the grand shrine of Ise, dedicated to Amaterasu herself. With the transition of power complete, Ninigi established his palace and began the work of bringing heavenly civilization to the earthly realm. He taught mortals the arts of agriculture, showing them how to cultivate rice in sacred paddies that would feed both body and soul. He established the first rituals of proper worship, ensuring that the kami would continue to bless the land with their presence. Most importantly, he took a mortal wife, Konohana no Sakuya Haim, the goddess of cherry blossoms, whose beauty was legendary and whose connection to the seasonal cycles would ensure that his divine line remained connected to the rhythms of earthly life. Their marriage would produce children who carried both divine blood and earthly understanding, creating the foundation of the imperial line that would rule Japan from that day forward. But it would be Ninigi's great-grandson who would take the final step in establishing the divine order that Amaterasu had envisioned. The step from divine rule to imperial rule, from mythic time to historical time, from the age of gods to the age of mortals guided by heaven's light. The first emperor. In the mists of ancient time, where history and myth danced together like lovers at twilight, there lived a prince whose destiny would bridge the realm of gods and the world of mortals. His name was Jimmu, though he was born as Kamuyamato Iwaribiko no Mikoto, a name that carried the weight of divine lineage and the promise of imperial greatness. As the great-great-grandson of Ninigi no Mikoto, Jimmu possessed divine blood flowing through his mortal veins. But he was born into a world where that divine heritage needed to be proven through deeds rather than simply inherited through birth. The gods had descended to earth, but the work of unifying the scattered tribes and establishing a true kingdom remained unfinished. Jimmu grew to manhood in Kyushu, in the shadow of Mount Takachiho, where his divine ancestor had first touched earthly soil. From childhood, he had been taught the sacred history of his lineage, how Amaterasu had blessed his family line with eternal rule, how the three sacred treasures validated their divine authority, how his very existence was part of the cosmic plan to bring heavenly order to the mortal realm. But knowledge and destiny were not enough. At the age of 45, when most men were considering the settling of their lives, Jimmu made a decision that would echo through Japanese history for thousands of years. He would lead his people eastward to the great island of Honshu, and there establish a kingdom worthy of his divine heritage. Standing on the shores of Kyushu, gazing across the waters toward the rising sun, Jimmu spoke words that revealed both his divine nature and his human determination. In the east, there is a beautiful land encircled by blue mountains. This must be the land from which to extend our heavenly rule and make the whole world one house. That land is surely the center of the world, and there we shall build our capital. The eastward journey was not a simple migration, but a sacred campaign, a mythic quest that would test every aspect of Jimmu's divine and mortal nature. With his brothers and a band of loyal followers, he embarked upon a voyage that took them through dangerous seas, across hostile territories, and into battles with earthly kami, who were not willing to surrender their domains without a fight. Their first major challenge came at the Kumano Peninsula, where the sea itself seemed to rise against them. Storms that appeared from clear skies battered their boats, and sea monsters with eyes like lanterns emerged from the depths to challenge their passage. But Jimmu carried with him the blessing of Amaterasu, and at each crisis, the sun goddess sent divine aid. When their boats were nearly swamped by supernatural storms, a three-legged crow appeared in the sky, Yatagarasu, the sacred messenger of Amaterasu herself. The crow flew ahead of their boats, guiding them safely through treacherous waters and leading them to safe harbor when the seas grew too dangerous to navigate. But the true tests awaited them on land. The Kii Peninsula was ruled by powerful local kami and human chieftains who had no intention of submitting to this upstart prince from Kyushu, divine heritage or not. Battle after battle awaited them as they fought their way through mountain passes and river valleys, each victory bringing them closer to their destined homeland, but at a terrible cost in blood and suffering. It was during the most desperate of these battles that Jimmu experienced the divine intervention that confirmed his heavenly mandate. Surrounded by enemies in a mountain pass, with his forces outnumbered and his brother Itsus dying from a poisoned arrow, defeat seemed certain. But suddenly, the sky darkened despite the clear weather, and from the clouds descended a golden kite, a bird of prey whose wings blazed with divine fire. The creature perched upon Jimmu's bow, and its radiance was so brilliant that the enemy forces were blinded and confused, allowing Jimmu's warriors to turn defeat into victory. This miracle convinced many of the local rulers that Jimmu truly carried heaven's blessing, and some began to submit to his authority without battle. Others, however, required more dramatic persuasion. The most significant of these challenges came from Nagasunahiko, a powerful chieftain who ruled the Yamato region, the very heartland that Jimmu sought to claim as the center of his kingdom. Nagasunahiko was no ordinary mortal, but a descendant of earthly kami, and he commanded both spiritual and military power that made him a formidable opponent. "I have heard of your claimed divine heritage," Nagasunahiko declared when Jimmu's messengers came to demand his submission. "But the sun rises in the east over my domain. How can one who comes from the west claim to be the child of the sun goddess? I am the true ruler of the land, where Amaterasu's light first touches the earth each day." This challenge cut to the heart of Jimmu's mission. How could he prove his divine legitimacy to those who had their own claims to spiritual authority? The answer came not through battle alone, but through a demonstration of the sacred treasure's power. In the decisive confrontation, Jimmu displayed the Yara no Kagami, the sacred mirror of Amaterasu. When its surface caught the morning sunlight, the reflected radiance was so pure and brilliant that it seemed to contain the very essence of the sun goddess herself. Nagasunahiko and his followers, seeing their own faces reflected alongside the divine light, understood at last that this prince truly carried heaven's mandate. The final conquest was achieved not through destruction, but through integration. Nagasunahiko surrendered and was granted an honored place in the new order, his local knowledge and spiritual authority preserved within the framework of imperial rule. This pattern, conquest followed by integration, victory followed by honored inclusion of former enemies, would become a hallmark of Japanese imperial expansion throughout history. On the first day of spring, in the year that would later be calculated as 660 BCE, Prince Jimmu stood upon the sacred ground of Kashihara in the Yamato region and performed the ceremony that would transform him from divine prince to earthly emperor. With the three sacred treasures displayed before him, surrounded by the kami of heaven and earth, witnessed by the chiefs and people who had accepted his rule, he spoke the words that established the imperial institution. "I shall build my palace here and make this the capital from which to rule in harmony with heaven's will. From this center, our influence shall spread in all directions, like ripples on a still pond, until the whole world acknowledges the divine order we represent." Thus was born the institution of the emperor in Japan, not as mere human kingship, but as the earthly embodiment of divine will, the living connection between Amaterasu's heavenly light and the needs of mortal people. The young prince took the name Jimmu, meaning divine warrior, and established the chrysanthemum throne that would endure for thousands of years. But even as he celebrated the achievement of his divine destiny, Emperor Jimmu understood that his victory was not an end, but a beginning. The real work of creating a civilization worthy of heaven's blessing still lay ahead. The work of establishing laws that reflected divine justice, customs that honored both kami and mortals, and traditions that would keep the connection between heaven and earth alive for all future generations. The sacred treasures were installed in the imperial palace, where they would remain as the visible symbols of legitimate rule. But their true power lay not in their physical presence, but in what they represented: the mirror's reflection of truth, the jewel's communication between realms, and the sword's protection of justice. From that day forward, every emperor would be understood not as a mere political ruler, but as the direct descendant of the sun goddess herself, carrying within his person the divine spark that connected the mortal world to the eternal realm of the kami. The age of myth had become the age of history, but the divine remained present in every aspect of earthly rule. The realm of spirits and monsters. But the kami of high heaven and the imperial court were not the only supernatural beings that shaped the spiritual landscape of Japan. In the shadows between worlds, in the liminal spaces where reality grew thin and possibility bloomed like midnight flowers, dwelt creatures whose nature defied easy categorization, beings that were neither fully divine nor entirely mortal, spirits that embodied the wild, untamed aspects of existence that no imperial decree could ever fully control. These were the yokai, the bakemono, the ayakashi, shapeshifters and tricksters, guardians and monsters, whose stories were whispered around campfires and spoken in hushed tones by travelers on lonely mountain paths. Unlike the orderly pantheon of Shinto kami or the structured hierarchy of imperial rule, these beings represented chaos and unpredictability, the reminder that beneath civilization's thin veneer lay forces older and stranger than human understanding. In the deepest pools of mountain rivers, where ancient trees bent down to drink from waters that had never known sunlight, lived the kappa, water spirits whose nature embodied both playful mischief and deadly danger. No larger than a human child, but infinitely stronger, with skin like wet leather and a water-filled depression on top of their heads that was the source of their supernatural power, the kappa were perhaps the most familiar of all yokai to the common people of Japan. Picture a young farmer's son, barely 14 summers old, making his way home from the rice paddies as evening shadows lengthen across the landscape. The path leads him beside the Kappa-gawa, the Kappa River, where local legend warns that unwary travelers might encounter one of these water demons. But the boy is tired from a long day's work, and the sound of flowing water is soothing in the growing darkness. As he pauses to splash cool water on his face, a voice calls out from the darkness beneath the opposite bank. "Young sir, would you care to test your strength against mine in a wrestling match?" The voice is high and childlike, almost playful, but there's something in its tone that makes the boy's skin crawl with instinctive fear. Peering into the shadows, he sees a figure emerging from the water, humanoid but wrong somehow, with a beak like a turtle's and webbed hands that gleam wetly in the moonlight. "I am Garappa," the creature announces, with a bow that would be courteous if not for the predatory gleam in its eyes. "I challenge all who pass by my river to contest of strength. Surely a strong young farmer like yourself is not afraid of a friendly competition. But the boy has listened to his grandmother's warnings about such challenges. Kappa, despite their small size, possessed supernatural strength when their head bowls were filled with water. They delighted in wrestling matches with humans, and when they won, which they almost always did, they would drag their victims beneath the water and feast upon their blood and entrails. Yet there was a way to defeat them, if one was clever enough. The boy bowed politely in return, as his grandmother had taught him. Honored Garapa-san, he said formally, I would be delighted to accept your challenge. But first, would you not show proper courtesy by bowing to a worthy opponent? Pride was the Kappa's weakness. Unable to resist demonstrating their superior manners, Garapa bowed deeply, and as he did so, the water spilled from the depression on his head, taking with it all his supernatural strength. Now as weak as any mortal child, the Kappa could only watch in dismay as the clever farm boy continued on his way home, leaving behind a valuable lesson about the power of wit over brute strength. Not all encounters with yokai ended so fortunately. In the dense forests that cloaked the sacred mountains, where even Buddhist monks feared to travel alone after dark, dwelt creatures far more dangerous than mischievous water spirits. The Tengu were beings of incredible power and barely contained malevolence, part bird and part human, masters of martial arts and supernatural abilities that could drive mortals to madness or death. The greatest of these was Sojobo, the Tengu king of Mount Kurama, whose wingspan could blot out the moon and whose sword skills were legendary, even among the kami. Standing over 8 feet tall, with the wings and talons of a gigantic bird of prey, but the face and torso of a fierce warrior, Sojobo commanded an army of lesser Tengu, who served as both his warriors and his students in the deadly arts of war. But the Tengu were not merely monsters to be feared. They represented something essential about the Japanese understanding of power and knowledge, the recognition that true mastery often came from sources outside the boundaries of civilized society. The greatest human warriors and monks sometimes sought out the Tengu as teachers, willing to risk their lives and sanity for the chance to learn supernatural techniques. Young Minamoto no Yoshitsune, who would grow up to become one of Japan's most legendary warriors, was said to have been trained in swordsmanship by Sojobo himself. Night after night, the boy would slip away from the monastery where he was being raised and climb the treacherous mountain paths to the Tengu's domain, where he would practice forms and techniques that no human master could teach. The training was brutal, beyond human endurance. Sojobo would force the boy to balance on sword points while fighting multiple opponents, to leap between treetops while dodging razor-sharp wind attacks, to meditate motionless for hours while lesser Tengu shrieked and howled around him, testing his concentration. Many nights, Yoshitsune would return to the monastery more dead than alive, his body covered in wounds that should have been fatal. But gradually, impossibly, he began to master abilities that transcended normal human limitations. He could move faster than the eye could follow, leap distances that defied gravity, and fight with a grace and precision that seemed more dance than combat. When he finally faced human opponents in battle, they seemed to move in slow motion compared to the supernatural speed he had learned from his inhuman teacher. Yet even Yoshitsune's story carried a warning about the price of seeking knowledge from the yokai. The skills he learned from Sojobo served him well in war, but they also isolated him from normal human society. His supernatural abilities inspired as much fear as admiration, and in the end, his own brother ordered his death, unable to tolerate the presence of someone whose power came from sources beyond human understanding. The forests held other dangers as well. The Yamamba, mountain witches, whose beauty could lure travelers to their doom, haunted lonely passes and abandoned temples. They appeared as lovely maidens in distress, begging for shelter or assistance, but their true forms were horrific, ancient crones with iron teeth and supernatural hunger for human flesh. One such creature was said to dwell in the ruins of a temple high on Mount Ashigara, where she posed as a kind old woman offering food and lodging to weary travelers. Her dwelling appeared cozy and welcoming from the outside, with warm light glowing from paper windows and the scent of cooking rice drifting on the mountain air. But those who accepted her hospitality would discover too late that they had become ingredients for her next meal. The rice was cooked with human bones, the tea was brewed from blood, and the kindly old woman's smile revealed rows of pointed teeth designed for tearing flesh. Only those with pure hearts or supernatural protection could hope to escape such encounters. The hero Kintaro, possessed of divine strength from birth, once faced such a Yamamba and survived by turning her own trickery against her. When she tried to boil him alive in a great iron pot, he simply tore the pot apart with his bare hands and used the pieces as weapons to drive her away. But perhaps the most terrifying of all yokai were the Oni, demons whose very existence represented the darkest aspects of supernatural power. Unlike the mischievous Kappa or the proud Tengu, Oni were creatures of pure malevolence, beings who delighted in causing suffering for its own sake. They appeared in many forms, some as gigantic humanoids with horns and fangs, skin red as blood or blue as a corpse, wielding iron clubs that could crush mountains. Others took more subtle shapes, infiltrating human society as merchants or priests, spreading corruption and despair wherever they went. The most feared Oni was Shutendoji, the drunken demon boy, who had once been human, but whose evil deeds had transformed him into something monstrous beyond redemption. From his stronghold on Mount Os, he led a band of demon warriors in raids against human settlements, not for food or treasure, but for the sheer joy of causing terror and destruction. It took a coalition of the greatest human heroes, armed with blessed weapons and protected by divine intervention, to finally defeat Shutendoji. Even then, the battle was won not through superior strength, but through cunning. The heroes disguised themselves as monks and drugged the demon's sake with the poison blessed by the gods themselves. Yet even in death, Shutendoji's head continued to speak, cursing his killers and prophesying that demons would forever plague the world of mortals. His final words were a reminder that evil, once unleashed, could never be entirely destroyed, only contained, fought against, and overcome through constant vigilance and the maintenance of spiritual purity. These creatures, and countless others like them, formed a shadow world that existed parallel to the ordered realm of kami and emperors. They reminded the people of Japan that chaos and mystery were woven into the very fabric of existence, that no amount of civilization could completely tame the wild forces that surrounded human life on all sides. But they also served another purpose. They were teachers of a sort, their stories conveying important lessons about courage, wisdom, and the dangers of straying too far from the paths of righteousness. In a world where the divine and supernatural were accepted as part of daily reality, the yokai served as both warning and wonder, reminders that existence was far stranger and more dangerous than it appeared on the surface. The sacred rhythm of seasons. In the heart of Japan, where ancient Shinto shrines nestled among groves of cryptomeria trees whose tops disappeared into morning mist. The people understood that the turning of seasons was not merely a natural phenomenon, but a sacred drama enacted by the kami themselves. Each transition from spring to summer, summer to autumn, autumn to winter, and winter back to spring was a divine story written across the landscape in cherry blossoms and autumn maples, in snow-covered mountains and the first tender shoots of rice. This was a land where mythology lived in the changing of the light, where every seasonal festival was a reenactment of cosmic events that had shaped the world since the age of the gods. The Japanese people did not simply observe the seasons, they participated in them, understanding their own lives as part of the eternal cycle that connected earth to heaven, mortal time to divine eternity. When spring arrived and the cherry blossoms began their brief, perfect bloom, the people saw not just natural beauty, but the embodiment of Konohana Sakuya Haim, the goddess of the cherry blossom who had married the divine grandson Ninigi. Her flowers were more than mere decoration. They were a yearly reminder of life's precious fragility and the divine beauty that could emerge from the marriage of heaven and earth. Picture the annual Hanami festival, when families would gather beneath the blooming sakura trees with elaborate picnic spreads, their laughter mixing with the sound of wind through pink and white petals. But this was not merely recreational, it was a form of worship, a communion with the goddess whose beauty graced the trees for such a brief, perfect moment each year. An old grandmother sits on a woven mat beneath the blossoming branches, her weathered hands gentle as she pours tea for her grandchildren. Watch carefully, she tells them, as petals drift down like snow made of silk. Sakuya Hime is showing us the most important lesson, that true beauty comes not from lasting forever, but from burning brightly in its moment, then gracefully letting go. As if in response to her words, a gust of wind shakes the branches, and thousands of petals swirl through the air like a pink and white snowstorm, covering the picnickers in nature's blessing. The children laugh and try to catch the falling flowers, but their grandmother's eyes are distant, seeing in this moment the eternal truth that the kami taught through the turning seasons. Summer brought different lessons, embodied in the fierce heat that seemed to pulse from the very earth itself. This was the season of Amaterasu's greatest power, when her light transformed the green rice paddies into seas of emerald that rippled in waves beneath the blazing sun. The farmers understood that their backbreaking work in the flooded fields was a collaboration with the sun goddess herself, their labor blessed by her divine energy. But summer also brought the terrifying beauty of thunderstorms, when Suzanu's wild nature was most clearly manifest. The afternoon storms that rolled across the mountains with such sudden violence were understood as the storm god's continued presence in the world, his reformed nature now serving to bring life-giving rain rather than destruction. In the ancient capital of Kyoto, the Gion festival marked the height of summer with pageantry that had continued for over 1,000 years. But beneath the elaborate floats and colorful processions lay a deeper truth. This was a festival born from the need to appease restless spirits during the season when the boundary between worlds was thinnest, when both beneficial and malevolent kami were most active in human affairs. The massive festival floats, some weighing several tons and decorated with priceless tapestries, were not merely parade decorations, but mobile shrines designed to carry the kami through the city streets, allowing the divine spirits to bless every neighborhood with their presence, while simultaneously containing any chaotic energies that might threaten the people's well-being. As autumn arrived and the mountains blazed with colors that seemed to burn with inner fire, the people recognized the influence of Okuninushi, the great lord of the hidden world who governed the spiritual realm parallel to the emperor's earthly authority. The spectacular autumn foliage was understood as his gift to humanity, a display of otherworldly beauty that reminded mortals of the wonders that lay beyond the visible world. The autumn festivals centered around gratitude, both to the kami who had blessed the harvest and to the rice itself, which was understood to possess its own divine spirit. The first fruits of the harvest were always offered at shrines before any human tasted them, acknowledging that the grain that sustained life was a gift from the divine realm that must be received with proper reverence and thanksgiving. In mountain villages, where the autumn colors were most spectacular, elderly priests would lead pilgrimages to sacred peaks where the veil between worlds was thinnest. These journeys were not mere sightseeing, but spiritual quests, opportunities to commune with the mountain kami who controlled the weather patterns that determined whether harvests would be abundant or scarce. One such mountain was Fujisan, whose perfect cone had been considered sacred since before recorded history. The mountain itself was understood to be the dwelling place of Konohana Sakuya, the cherry blossom goddess who had become its protective spirit after her marriage to the divine prince. Pilgrims who climbed its slopes during the autumn season believed they were ascending not just a physical peak, but a spiritual ladder that connected the earthly realm to the dwelling place of the gods. The climb was arduous and dangerous, requiring both physical endurance and spiritual purification. Pilgrims would spend days in ritual cleansing before beginning the ascent, purging themselves of worldly concerns and mundane thoughts that might interfere with their communion with the divine. The mountain demanded complete respect. Those who approached with impure hearts or selfish motives often found themselves lost in sudden fog or turned back by supernatural forces. But those who climbed with proper reverence were rewarded with experiences that transcended ordinary reality. At the summit, watching the sunrise from above the clouds, they felt themselves connected to Amaterasu herself, participating in the daily miracle of light returning to the world. Many reported visions of the goddess, appearing sometimes as pure light, sometimes as a figure of impossible beauty, standing upon the morning clouds. Winter brought the most subtle, but perhaps most profound, seasonal mythology. This was the time of endurance and inner reflection, when the visible world seemed to sleep beneath blankets of snow, but the invisible realm of spirits was most active. The Japanese winter festivals acknowledged both the hardship of the cold season and its essential role in the cycle of renewal. The New Year celebrations were the most important of all winter observances, marking not just the passage of calendar time, but the cosmic renewal of the universe itself. Every household engaged in elaborate cleaning rituals that were both practical and spiritual, sweeping away not just physical dust, but the accumulated spiritual impurities of the past year. Special foods were prepared according to traditions that reached back to the age of the gods. Rice cakes that symbolized the divine grain, sweet sake that connected celebrants to the heavenly banquets of the kami, and elaborate arrangements of pine, bamboo, and plum that represented the endurance, flexibility, and hope needed to survive winter and welcome spring. But the most profound winter ritual was the quiet time of contemplation, when families would gather around irori, the sunken hearths that provided both warmth and a focal point for storytelling. By the flickering light of charcoal fires, grandparents would pass down the ancient stories that connected each generation to the mythological roots of their culture. These were not just entertainment, but sacred transmission, the stories of Amaterasu and Susanoo, of the descent of Ninigi and the founding of the imperial line, of the countless kami who governed every aspect of existence. Each tale carried within it practical wisdom about how to live in harmony with the forces that shaped both natural and supernatural worlds. In remote mountain villages, where winter snows could isolate communities for months at a time, these storytelling sessions became the primary means of maintaining cultural continuity. The mythology lived not just in written texts, but in the memories and voices of people who understood that they were the living links in an unbroken chain of transmission that stretched back to the age of the gods themselves. As winter slowly gave way to spring again, and the cycle prepared to begin anew, the people of Japan understood that they had participated in something far greater than mere seasonal change. They had lived through a cosmic drama, playing their own small but essential roles in the eternal story that connected all existence to the divine source from which it had emerged. The cherry blossoms would bloom again, summer storms would bring life-giving rain, autumn would paint the mountains in supernatural colors, and winter would offer its gifts of endurance and inner reflection. And through it all, the kami would continue their eternal dance, weaving the threads of divine and mortal existence into the magnificent tapestry that was Japan, a land where mythology was not ancient history, but living truth, visible in every sunset, audible in every wind, present in every human heart that understood its connection to the sacred rhythm of the turning year. The living mythology of modern Japan. Even today, in the neon-lit streets of Tokyo, where bullet trains glide past ancient shrines at impossible speeds, where businessmen bow at roadside torii gates between checking their smartphones, the ancient mythology of Japan continues to pulse like blood through the veins of a culture that has never truly abandoned its divine origins. This is perhaps the most remarkable aspect of Japanese mythology, its refusal to become merely historical, its insistence on remaining relevant and alive in a world of skyscrapers and technology. Walk through any Japanese city, and you will find the old gods and spirits living alongside the new, their presence as natural as breathing, as accepted as the sunrise that still bears Amaterasu's blessing each morning. In the heart of Tokyo's most modern district, a small shrine dedicated to Inari, the rice deity, receives daily offerings from office workers who pray for success in business deals and stock market investments. The fox statues that guard the shrine wear red bibs tied by devoted petitioners, and the offerings left at their feet include not just traditional rice and sake, but also energy drinks and convenience store snacks, modern offerings to an ancient power. The mythology has evolved without losing its essential truth. The kami who once governed agricultural cycles now oversee urban life with the same benevolent attention. Amaterasu's light blesses solar panels and illuminates computer screens. Susanu's storms still bring necessary rain, but also test the engineering of modern buildings and infrastructure. The thunder god's reformed nature is seen in the controlled power of electricity that lights the cities and powers the technology that drives Japanese innovation. Consider the ritual that takes place each morning at the headquarters of major Japanese corporations. Before the day's business begins, executives gather at small company shrines, modern adaptations of ancient sacred spaces, to offer prayers for prosperity and protection. These are not empty gestures, but genuine expressions of belief that success comes not just from human effort, but from maintaining harmony with the spiritual forces that govern all existence. The same businessman who prays at the company shrine for blessing on a merger might later visit a traditional shrine to ask for his daughter's success in school examinations, understanding that Tenjin, the deified spirit of learning, can influence educational outcomes just as surely as Inari can bless commercial ventures. The mythology provides a complete system for navigating all aspects of life, from the most personal to the most professional. Japanese popular culture has become perhaps the most visible way that ancient mythology continues to influence modern consciousness. Anime and manga regularly feature stories where traditional kami and yokai interact with contemporary characters, where ancient powers manifest in modern settings, where the boundaries between mythological and everyday reality remain beautifully fluid. The worldwide popularity of these cultural exports has created a fascinating phenomenon. Japanese mythology spreading across the globe in forms that make it accessible to international audiences while preserving its essential spiritual core. A child in America might learn about the importance of harmony between nature and civilization through a Studio Ghibli film, while a teenager in Europe might discover the concept of protective spirits through manga about urban yokai. But the mythology's influence goes deeper than popular entertainment. The Japanese approach to technology itself reflects mythological principles that have guided the culture for millennia. The concept of giving souls to inanimate objects, the idea that everything possesses some form of spiritual essence, has influenced the development of robotics and artificial intelligence in uniquely Japanese ways. When Japanese engineers create robots, they often speak of giving them kokoro, heart or spirit, rather than simply programming functionality. The popular practice of holding funeral ceremonies for outdated robots reflects the ancient belief that objects that have served humans faithfully deserve respect and gratitude when their usefulness ends. This is the mythology of Tsukumogami, the belief that tools and objects can develop souls through long use and care, applied to contemporary technology. The environmental consciousness that drives much of Japanese policy and innovation also draws from mythological roots. The concept of living in harmony with natural forces rather than attempting to dominate them reflects the ancient understanding that humans are part of a larger spiritual ecosystem that includes the kami who govern mountains, rivers, forests, and weather patterns. When Japanese architects design buildings that work with natural light and airflow rather than fighting against environmental conditions, they are applying principles that derive from the mythology of sacred space, the understanding that human creations should complement rather than compete with the divine forces that shape the natural world. The seasonal rhythms that once governed agricultural life now influence urban planning and cultural events. The cherry blossom viewing season still brings millions of people into parks and gardens for Hanami celebrations that combine ancient spiritual practice with modern community building. The autumn leaf viewing season draws urban populations back to mountain areas where they can reconnect with the natural cycles that their ancestors understood as divine drama. Even the modern Japanese approach to work and social harmony reflects mythological principles. The concept of weo, harmony or peace, that governs group dynamics in everything from corporate meetings to classroom interactions derives from the ancient understanding that individual desires must be balanced with collective welfare, that true prosperity comes from maintaining proper relationships between all parts of the social and spiritual ecosystem. The emperor remains a living symbol of the mythological connection between divine and human realms. While the political role has evolved dramatically, the spiritual significance endures. Each new emperor still performs ancient rituals that reenact the descent of Ninigi and the establishment of divine rule on earth. The coronation ceremonies include presentations of the three sacred treasures that connect contemporary Japan to its mythological origins. But perhaps most remarkably, the mythology continues to provide comfort and guidance during times of crisis. After natural disasters, people turn to traditional prayers and rituals not as superstition, but as meaningful ways of processing trauma and rebuilding communities. The ancient understanding that natural forces are expressions of divine will, sometimes challenging, sometimes destructive, but always part of a larger pattern of renewal and growth, provides a framework for finding meaning in suffering and hope in devastation. The shrines that were damaged by earthquakes or tsunamis are rebuilt with the same dedication that originally created them, reflecting the mythological principle that sacred spaces are not just human constructions, but dwelling places of kami who must be honored and housed properly if communities are to prosper. As Japan moves forward into an uncertain future, facing challenges of aging population, environmental change, and global economic pressures, the ancient mythology continues to provide both practical wisdom and spiritual sustenance. The stories that began with Izanagi and Izanami creating islands from primordial chaos remain relevant to a culture still engaged in the ongoing work of creation, building societies, technologies, and relationships that honor both human needs and divine principles. The mythology has not survived by remaining unchanged, but by demonstrating its eternal relevance to the fundamental questions of human existence. How do we live in harmony with forces greater than ourselves? How do we balance individual desires with collective welfare? How do we find meaning in beauty that is temporary, strength that comes through cooperation, and wisdom that emerges from accepting our place in patterns too vast for complete human understanding? These are the questions that the kami have always posed to their human children, and they remain as urgent today as they were when the first emperors walked beneath cherry blossoms and listened for the voices of spirits in the wind through mountain forests. The eternal dance. In the quiet moments before sleep, when the busy world grows still and consciousness begins its gentle drift toward dreams, we can still hear the ancient rhythms that have pulsed through Japanese hearts for thousands of years. They echo in the sound of wind through bamboo groves, in the soft splash of water over stones and temple gardens, in the distant bells that call the faithful to evening prayers, at shrines where gods and mortals have met since time beyond memory. This is the gift that Japanese mythology offers to the world, not just a collection of stories about ancient gods and supernatural creatures, but a living system of understanding that sees divinity in every aspect of existence, that finds wisdom in the turning of seasons and truth in the relationships between all living things. The stories we have shared tonight are more than entertainment, more than historical curiosity. They are invitations to see the world through eyes that recognize magic as natural, chaos as part of order, mortality as the price and privilege of being truly alive. They remind us that we are part of a cosmic story that began before human memory and will continue long after our brief individual chapters have ended. Amaterasu still rises each morning, her light blessing solar panels and dewdrops with equal grace. Suzanu's reformed storms still bring both challenge and renewal. The mountain kami still guard their peaks while welcoming pilgrims who climb seeking truth. The yokai still dance in the shadows, reminding us that mystery and wonder lurk just beyond the edges of our comfortable certainties. In a world that often seems divided between the ancient and modern, the sacred and secular, the rational and mystical, Japanese mythology offers a different path, one that embraces contradiction as natural, that finds the divine within the ordinary, that understands technology and tradition not as opposites, but as different expressions of the same creative force that brought islands from primordial seas and light from cosmic darkness. Perhaps this is why these stories continue to captivate audiences around the world, why children raised on different continents find truth in tales of fox spirits and storm gods, why the mythology spreads not through conquest or conversion, but through the simple recognition of eternal truths dressed in unfamiliar clothes. The cherry blossoms that bloom and fall in temple gardens speak the same language as the brief, beautiful moments of joy that illuminate every human life. The patience of the mountain spirits echoes the endurance required to build anything meaningful. The playful trickery of Kappa mirrors the humor that helps us survive difficult times. The terrible beauty of Oni reminds us that destruction and creation are often indistinguishable from each other. As the night deepens and these ancient voices grow softer, blending with the sound of your breathing and the rhythm of your heartbeat, let them carry you toward dreams where gods walk among humans, where every forest holds secrets, where love can literally move mountains and light can be reborn from the deepest darkness. Tomorrow, you will wake to a world that seems ordinary, governed by physical laws and human institutions, measured in clock time and digital metrics. But if you listen carefully, if you watch with eyes opened by ancient stories, you might catch glimpses of the deeper reality that mythology reveals. A world where spirits dwell in every shadow, where divine forces shape every moment, where the cosmic dance of creation and destruction continues in the changing of the seasons, the rising of the sun, the eternal turning of the great wheel that connects all existence in patterns too beautiful and complex for any single mind to fully comprehend. Sleep now and dream of islands being born from drops of brine, of goddesses emerging from sacred caves, of princes descended from heaven to bring order to chaos, of storms that destroy and nourish, of snow that covers and protects, of spring that always returns no matter how long or dark the winter. Dream of Japan, where mythology lives in the spaces between skyscraper and shrine, where ancient truths wear modern dress, where the 8 million kami continue their eternal vigil over the land they helped to create and the people they chose to bless with their presence. The stories continue, even in sleep, even in silence, even in the gentle darkness that welcomes all tired souls home to the source from which all stories flow and to which all stories return, like rivers finding their way to the eternal sea.